HBO's House of Dragons is a Game of Thrones spin-off about a house trying to rebrand its dragon image only to fail due to infighting and backstabbing, and of course it made me think about the Brooklyn Nets. That's because once upon a time, the Nets tried to make their own House of Dragons, and it ended about as well. Welcome to Hoops and Dreams, and we're going to talk about that time that the Brooklyn Nets tried to change their name to the New Jersey Swamp Dragons, and why it would have passed if it wasn't for the Brooklyn Nets. So in 1994, the Nets basically lived in the shadow of the New York Knicks.
Hold on, bro.
Because they have to change their approach of what they're saying.
Hold on for a second. What market they in?
They didn't have much of an identity, and that which they did involved losing.
New Jersey is not New York.
But they had a plan to change all that. All they needed was a name change. The Nets noticed that the Charlotte Hornets, the Toronto Raptors, and the Vancouver Grizzlies were selling tons of merchandise with bright colors and kid-friendly nicknames, while the Nets were dead last in merchandising sales. In fact, some manufacturers didn't even make their gear. In their view, being the Nets was akin to being the New York second bases, so to shake things up, they had to change their name. But their first idea was even crazier than the Swamp Dragons, but only just barely. Because first, they tried to change the name of the city that they played in. See, at the time, the Nets played in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and they thought that maybe the name was the problem.
That place was a dump when I played. It's still a dump.
So the Nets' top brass goes to the city officials, and they're like, and I quote, "Hey, we want to change your name. Here's a couple $1,000,000 for the rights." Basically, the idea was that after they bought the town's name, they'd turn around and sell the naming rights to Nike or something and become the Nike Nets. And if that sounded like a bad idea to you, kudos, you could work for East Rutherford because it sounded like a bad idea to them too, and they nixed the proposal. Now, with the Nike Nets out of the question, their leadership needed a new name, and again, they looked to the Toronto Raptors for inspiration. And by inspiration, I mean leftovers, because in 93-94, when the Toronto Raptors expansion franchise chose its name, Dragons was amongst the finalists. The Nets were like, hey, everyone loves Dragons, so let's take it. But now that they had the name, they had another problem. Since Dragons aren't native to New Jersey, how can they make Dragons locally relevant? What's something that just screams New Jersey? Yeah, that's where Swamp Dragon comes in, because every time they looked outside their offices, they saw a New Jersey swamp and decided to roll with it. Now, Swamp Dragon may sound wild, but their opinion was, what's a net anyway? It has no intrinsic value, so why not change it? And to be honest, I've asked the same question, but now that they had the perfect name, they actually had another problem. Could they get NBA Commissioner David Stern to sign off on it? And when the Nets met with Stern and pitched the idea, it did not go well. Not only did he call it the stupidest idea he's ever heard, but he was so mad that they thought he would actually pick one of them up and toss him out of the 15th floor window. But miraculously, they walked out of the meeting with Stern's blessing, providing that they could get the backing of all 7 of the Nets' co-owners. But David Stern wasn't being a nice guy. As usual, he actually had a plan. See, he was actually banking on the fact that those 7 owners were notorious for not agreeing on anything. The joke was, if you'd ask them whether a light was on, 2 guys would vote yes, 2 would vote no, and 3 would abstain. But once again, once the pitch was made, every single co-owner signed on. Now, with the 7 on boards, that's when things got real, and the Nets and the NBA shelled out $500,000 to protect the name and likeness of Swampy the Swamp Dragon. They experimented on everything, with the logo, the jersey, and even the court design got touched, which caused another headache for David Stern because the all-blue jerseys in court were hard to see for television. But even then, he didn't stop it because he had a plan. He knew that the Nets still needed a supermajority of the league's 27 owners to approve the change, and there was no way that power owners like Jerry Buss from the Lakers would get behind a move like that, right? Wrong. Much to David Stern's chagrin, the idea was a hit amongst the owners. They all loved it, with Jerry Buss actually being one of the most vocal supporters. But that's when the good vibes ended, because as the final vote drew near, news of the proposed name change leaked, and the backlash to being associated with a swamp was swift and severe, with even the governor reaching out to voice her displeasure with the moves. But the Nets' position was that the Meadowlands is in a swamp. They weren't being funny, they were keeping it real.
I ain't saying it wasn't a dump.
And they kept their proposal going. Finally, it was time for the Board of Governors to vote. And remember, at this point, all the New Jersey Nets needed to become the New Jersey Swamp Dragons was a supermajority of the 27 votes. Instead, they got a landslide. They got 26 votes with only one team voting against. Now, if you see that they got the votes and are aware that they're still the Nets, you might be asking, what the is going on? That's literally what David Stern said at the time, because the one dissenting team to vote against the Nets was the Nets. See, remember how I said the Nets had 7 co-owners? Well, the co-owners rotated voting duties on the league's Board of Governors, and at that meeting, David Gerstein got cold feet and voted no. And that was it. Even though if any of the other co-owners were in that chair that day, they would have voted yes, and the Nets would be the Swamp Dragons to this day. If your team votes no, there's no way you can go ahead on something like this. Defeated but undeterred, after failing to change the name of the team, the Nets went back to Plan A and changed the name of the city. Except this time, they did it the good old-fashioned way and moved the team to Brooklyn. And sometime after that, the Brooklyn Nets signed Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons. And nothing crazy ever happened to them again, right? Right? Thanks for watching Hoops and Dreams. If you dig the vibe, hit the subscribe to join the tribe. Peace.